Go ahead and get started. So I would like to, oh, here, let me stand over here. Hi. Welcome, everybody, and welcome to the third week of this class in the spaces of the Catholic Church. So this course has been about discovering the Catholic Church in America. And over the three quarters, the first quarter here, we're looking at the spaces, Catholic sacred spaces in the United States. Next quarter, we're going to be looking at landmarks, places, and key landmarks. And then the third quarter, we'll be looking at faces, which is some key people in Catholic history in the United States. But we've been talking about sacred spaces and American churches, American Catholic churches, and how they're built, why they're built, and what goes on in them. And we're excited tonight to have some guest speakers. So we have John Van Houten and Jamie Benvenuto, who are principal architects from Progressive AE architecture firm in Grand Rapids. We've gotten to know them a little bit because they've been doing some consulting with us here at Our Lady of the Lake on potentially making some changes, moving our tabernacle and some things like that. And they've got enormous experience in working in Catholic sacred spaces, Catholic churches, especially in the Diocese of Grand Rapids in West Michigan, where they've done or are doing a dozen different churches, it seems like. And so we were excited to have them come tonight and talk about the wheres and why-fors of how and why Catholic churches are designed the way they are, what some of the canonical requirements, Vatican II taught us and so forth. So, and then next week, they're going to be leading us on a field trip to two churches that they've been working on in Grand Rapids. So with no further ado, I'd like to welcome John Van Houten and Jamie Benvenuto.
Okay, just to start it off so you know a little bit more about us, we're from Progressive AE, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Can everybody hear me in the back? Let's make sure. We have been designing churches. The firm has been designing churches for over 60 years, a variety of different denominations, 18 different denominations throughout those years. But tonight we're going to talk a little bit more about the Catholic Church. We've been very fortunate that we have worked in 3 dioceses here in the area. We've worked in Kalamazoo Diocese, in the Lansing Diocese, and also most of our work is in the Grand Rapids Diocese.
Speak up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jamie?
Yeah, so, well, John, you are the worship practice leader at Progressive. So I've been, I'm an architectural designer at Progressive, so I've been working in Catholic worship projects for about 10 years now. Everything from master planning campuses to doing architectural projects. So you'll see a lot of our work here. Some of the work we're showing isn't ours, but they're great examples of how we wanted to convey these ideas.
So just to give you a quick understanding of how we work and how we help design Catholic churches, we thought we'd just put this up and we'll quickly go through it a minute here. We call it frame, aspire, create, integrate, and validate. So that's our whole process. So frame is exactly what it sounds like. It's collecting all the existing information to try to get an understanding of who you are, because each church community is different. You need to keep that in mind. So each church that we work on, the Catholic basics are all there, but each church is different. Each community, how it's represented, how it works, it's different. We try to capture that culture to create that unique place where they belong. And aspire is what you want to be. Simple as that. We can talk about that. Create is we finally get to draw something on paper. So there's a lot of steps before we get there. And then finally integrate is putting the building together, building it. And then finally in the end is validate to make sure we did our job. So very simple.
And we'll go more into that kind of starts to frame how we're going to walk through this presentation today. So we wanted to walk you through some things that influence our design as we're and pretty much how we start. So we're going to work from the greater community all the way to parish, all the way to the exterior and inside the church. So we're kind of going today from a macro scale to a very micro scale. We'll be talking about artwork and architecture and community influences.
So another thing, keep in mind, one of the unique things about the Catholic Church that's different than the Protestant churches is the 5 senses. So our
Can you speak a bit louder?
I will try. Is the five senses. And so if you think about what we try to do in the Catholic Church design is to make sure that you can see what's going on, you can hear what's going on, different, whether it's music, whether it's spoken word, smell, whether it's the oils, whether it's incense, touch, different feelings and textures that you see in the church and you touch. And then finally, taste.
Yeah.
So you just think about, I'll just pick on this one, the song, taste and see. And so the goodness of our Lord. So anyway, there's all those different things. And that's what we try to accomplish when we create a Catholic Church and we work with going through that.
So we're going to talk a lot today about materiality and some of those influences and how we kind of translate that into architecture. So this is a picture of a workshop, and it looks a little bit crazy here, but what we do is we try to do these icebreaker events, and this is really to get out from a church. Where do you want to be in 10 years? Where do you want to be in 20 years? And so we have these groups work together, and we'll do this at a community-wide scale, all the way down to a parish level scale. So some of these workshops will have 100 people at them, some of them will have 10 people at them, and it might just be the building committee. But really what we're trying to do is that aspire phase, and we're trying to get out of the parish community, kind of what their needs and aspirations are. And I think, something important to mention with this is probably one of the most important parts of our process. Like John said, every Catholic church is very different. There's not really a cookie cutter way to go about it. And, we're really influenced by a lot of the cultures of the community that come together. So that's why we reach out to the community scale and then down to parish. And this kind of shows you, this is, so after the first time we kind of touch a pen to paper, right? We're really looking at the greater site around a building. We're looking at how the traffic is impacting the building, what kind of public areas are around the building. So this, for example, is an early site plan of St. Mary Magdalene in Kentwood. This is one of the churches we're going to next week. So in the back, there's baseball fields. It's a huge community attraction during the weekends. In the front, it's on a very busy street. And so this is our initial thought on how to site the building. We're looking at solar studies. One of the important things in Catholic architecture is daylighting and doing it correctly so that we're not blinding people as they're worshiping and making it a beautiful experience.
Question.
Was that a remodel or a brand new?
This church burned down and it was a brand new building.
Okay, we should keep that distinction because we of course live with a
Absolutely.
proposed redo.
Yep, and you're gonna see a lot of, so this one, the worship area burned down and we connected to the existing family life center and classrooms. We're gonna show a lot of projects too today that were remodels. We mostly do remodels. And so this just starts to give you an initial idea of, we're going to show you some plans and then we'll get into some imagery. But this starts to give you an initial idea of some of the different layouts as we're approaching these churches. So this is a site layout for St. Mary Magdalene. So what you're seeing here is a very axial arrangement. And you're also seeing it's further away from the street. It's got a very direct entry, both where you're driving into, and then we're entering all the way to the sanctuary. And if we go to the plan, you can see that in the plan. So when you're looking at a plan like this, the yellow is going to be the gathering space. The blue is the worship. The green is the sanctuary. Fire is the orange area, and the chapel is the purple. And on there, we've also started to note where some of the liturgical features are. So baptismal font, you'll notice on all of these layouts, they're in different spots. So in this one, the baptismal font is off to the side as well as the tabernacle. Reconciliation is in the worship area and very pronounced in this church, and then the candle areas as well.
So one of the challenges with Catholic churches is that, the gathering area is a very challenging area because when you come into the church, you're asked to be quiet, prepare yourself to get ready to come in and worship. And when it comes out, it needs to be the community center. So it's a very tricky space to try to figure out how to make that happen. Now, Jamie brought up something else that's interesting here. And you're going to see it in a variety of different spots when we start going to the slides, the baptismal font. And the baptismal font, typically you'll see in church designs today, ends up at the entry into the worship space. Okay, and so some of these you're going to see, because of different conditions and different cultures, the baptismal is up front. Depending on why, the reasons why, we'll explain when we get there. But that had to be approved by the bishop. The bishop approved it for the right reasons. And so you're going to see, like I said, that's what I make sure you understand. You're going to see a variety of different occasions where these baptismal fonts will come. And
that goes for the tabernacle as well. You'll see some to the side, you'll see some centered on the sanctuary, and some are closer to the chapel. So this is, if anyone's been to Douglas, this is St. Peter's in Douglas. So this church we just completed last summer, I think. And we worked on their outside prayer garden this spring. So that was just completed as well this summer. So St. Peter's was an addition and renovation. So we put an addition onto the exterior of the building and renovated the entire interior. You can see St. Peter's is a very different layout than St. Mary Magdalene, right? So this is a very pedestrian-centric area. A lot of people ride their bikes, a lot of people walk to church. So we've got the building a lot closer to the sidewalk, and without the parking going in between. We've got trails that go around the building that people can start to, bikers would use them and start to interact with the Catholic identity. So things like approaching Stations of the Cross or a rosary garden, you're going to catch the community in those areas. And it's really just a place of respite for the community. So much different site plan than you see for St. Mary Magdalene, which is on a busier road for St. Peter's. And so again, the church layout is very different on here. So in this layout, you're entering from the side, and the gathering space is, I'd say it's a little more casual than something like St. Mary Magdalene. So it's a place where a town hall may be set up. And then as you get closer to the worship area, we start to set up more of a reverent experience, and we'll show you images of that before you walk in. And then once you enter into the church, that's where everything is pretty much on axis there. The tabernacle is front and center for this church. And the baptismal font is right when you walk inside the worship area.
For those who have been to St. Peter's, I don't know if you remember, is that what would end up happening is you would walk up to the door, and 2 steps you would be in the church. You'd go through the vestibule, and then 2 steps later you're in the church. And that was typically how a lot of churches are set up. And so what we've been trying to do is make the church more transparent, so that people can see and understand what we do in church, versus having 2 doors and a steeple. And it's really hard to understand what happens to the public. And to make it transparent that we're here 7 days a week. We are not here 2 days a week, or just Sundays and Wednesdays. We are here 7 days a week to help serve you. So with St. Peter's and with St. Mary Magdalene, to a point, we all try to open it up so that we can understand what's happening in the church daily.
Yeah, it's one of those stories of where they want to be welcoming to the community, right? And so by creating this transparent gathering space that the community can see into, people are more apt to go and visit the church on a Sunday.
So the yellow part was all added to the church.
Yes, the yellow and the purple was all added here.
The purple is a building,
That is a chapel.
or a building.
It was all added. And this, where you see these columns, that was the old exterior wall. And then the last plan that we're going to show you today before we get into images is a very traditional plan. So St. Mary Parish, do you remember when that was built?
1875.
1875. So this church, we're hanging the crucifix this week, actually. So this is in Marshall, Michigan. It's a beautiful church that we did a renovation to the interior on. Both a renovation to the choir area and then just aesthetic renovation, as well as to the sanctuary.
So one of the things you'll notice is that it is a Latin cross. I've seen you talk about that. Latin cross and Greek cross. So this is a Latin cross church.
You can see that right
You
here,
can see it
right on the roof plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as you're looking at this plan here, the Latin cross is very noticeable. So as we went through the renovation of this, we're trying to respect the traditional layout of it and also enhance it for this generation. And the last renovation that they had was, I think it was in 1980. So just kind of give it a refresh for now. So a lot of things that we'll talk about, you'll see images of this today, and it's about switching some of the materiality in there, bringing liturgical art. One of the things that we did here that traditionally isn't always done is bring the liturgical art out so that it's more accessible to the parish and less kind of hidden away or you can't touch
So
it.
one of the unfortunate things about this church is that the 80s renovation basically got rid of all the traditional artwork. in the
Frescoes
church. The
and-
frescoes,
yeah.
the high altar, all the stuff was thrown out. And so we're starting out all that wonderful stuff. And you know, like most churches, this is one thing that people forget about most churches, is that everyone has this expectation of what a church should be, and they forget that these churches are built over time. And so this is the first step in them rebuilding their church. And so they had a certain amount of dollars, we got as much as we could. We have another layer of stuff for them to do, they decide to do the next layer to maybe bring back some of that liturgical stuff that when the original church was there to help create it again. And so again, it's the same for every church. And to remember that these, as was probably presented to you earlier, is that these churches, the big churches that everybody loves, and everybody wants to have, were built over hundreds of years. And people forget that our churches are built 3 years, and we sort of forget about them. And we remember that we have to take that time to take them to the next level and move them up, whether it's through liturgical art, whether it's through stretch here, but liturgical art or other things to update the
Just
churches
refresh them.
or refresh them. And that's just something you gotta keep in mind as you go.
Okay, so now we're gonna get into a lot of images in here, and we've got pauses throughout this presentation for questions as well. If you have questions while we're talking, you can absolutely ask them too, okay? So this is the entry to St. Peter in Douglas. So you can see here, it's a little bit more pedestrian centric. What we really wanted to talk about is the entry space to gathering in these churches. So again, like John was saying before, we are trying to make these transparent. We're trying to make them welcoming. A lot of times you'll see a canopy that designates an entry so that when someone approaches the building, they know where to go into it. The main doors are very visible. And also in these spaces, what we're doing now is doing a lot of plaza spaces at the entry. So it's an area to gather. Michigan summers, right? We enjoy them so much. And so it's this area to gather outdoors for the whole parish.
So was this New construction or,
This is, so this is the outside, that whole yellow arc on St. Peter.
no,
This
new?
is the main entry doors.
Yeah, so this is Saint Sebastian Environment Center. Those that are familiar. This one here sets up a wonderful opportunity from the road all the way in. You take the drive in, and once you get there, you're greeted by Saint Sebastian, and you can see the statue there. The wonderful thing about this is that, again, the entry is identified. It's a single entry to come in, but when you come up to the doors, which to us are very critical, is that you open the doors and they're heavy, they're wood, they're making sure that you understand that you're entering into the church versus last curtain wall, which is missing. But just to make sure that you understand that this is an important moment when you step in.
And we do that a lot at the main entry doors, and then again, when you enter worship or a chapel, and it's really that physically slowing you down, that process.
That's a new church that was built like 10 years ago.
And this is St. Mary Magdalene, so we're gonna visit this church next week. So St. Mary Magdalene, this is a completely new build, what you're seeing here in this image. You can see that what we're trying to do on the exterior is express what's going on inside, right? So you've got the very axial entry here. You've got a transparent gathering space where there's when it's lit up at night, you can see it from the road. And also anything that's worship on this church is that white or tan color. Anything that's not in the worship area is the darker brown brick that ties in with the rest of the building. So we're trying to kind of make some of those correlations so that people can recognize that as they go in. That helps someone know the pathway and kind of where they're headed, right? And St. Robert's, this is the other church that we'll be going to next Monday. So this is in Ada, Michigan. And St. Robert's is doing something very similar. So you see this tall point right here. So that is right at the center of the sanctuary. So again, we're highlighting that most important piece of the interior from the exterior. Again, getting the windows in there for daylighting and plenty of clear story in there as well.
So one of the concepts for St. Robert's was, and you can't really see it from this side, but you'll understand it when we go inside the church, is that it's your journey. Basically, the structure represents a tent, and that you're on a journey, a path. Christ. So the structure that you see here is, you'll see it swooping up, you'll see the wood structure when you get in, but it's basically representing a tent, represent the journey that you're on.
So this was a new church?
Yep.
So this is not the main entrance?
No.
Okay, I was like, I don't see the.
There's no
This is
doors on
window.
this side. You are staring right at the center of that building. The high part is the back of the sanctuary.
One of the challenging part of this church is the entry, because it seats, I think, 1,500 people.
It's had multiple additions.
And it's in all, but the entrance to the church is very difficult because we have to try to get 50 people in and out. And so there is a main entry, but most of the people don't use the main entry because of all.
There's parking all the way around the building. So
So,
St. Mary Magdalene, the very axial traditional one that we were talking about. This one, something that was really important to them. The church that burned down was a half circle, and it had like 6 different entrances in there. And I actually went there as a child. And I know we always used to park on the side and come in through the side entrance, right? And one of their goals was, they're like, since we're rebuilding, we want everyone to come in the same door. And so that was that very strong axial alignment on this one. That's what drove that.
just to give you the opposite of St. Robert's, the Monsignor who was in charge of building it didn't believe there was a straight path to heaven. So everything within the church reflects that. And so it's just a different challenge at the So it's just two different perspectives. They're both right, but they're just different.
So we got a few of these slides to pause, take any questions that anyone might have, whether it's online or virtually or in the room here today.
I noticed in a couple of examples ago, there were 5 elements of the church, but only 4 of them were shown. I think the choir space or something
Yes.
was missing.
Yes,
Keep
so
going back,
this one right
right
here.
there.
So what you're seeing here is there are some dashed orange lines there. And that is representative of the choir loft. So in this very traditional layout of St. Mary's.
Where is the choir loft?
So the choir loft is right up above the worship area. And that's where we just installed an organ there. That's where the organ is now, and that's where the choir sings from.
Oh, in the front of the church.
In the very back.
So your
Yeah.
For the far right.
so
Yeah.
your typical church back in the day, basically there was choir loft at the back of the church, and that's where this choir is located.
And we'll have images of that loft to show you. It's quite cool because you're up there with the arches and with the lighting.
And that's the orange part on the right.
Yes, those orange dashes there. Yeah.
Okay.
So when you enter into the church, you walk under the choir loft. And then you're in the larger space.
That was very typical for
Yeah.
long.
It was. Any questions?
Is there ever an orientation as to front door? North, south, east, west? Or does that not matter?
It doesn't, we don't typically design around the orientation. There is a traditional orientation though.
What I would say is that what we've been told many times by many different church consultants is to make sure that when we design the church, that we place the sanctuary and altar, that we, at any time during the day, we don't want it backlit by the sun. Because
I'm sorry, you don't what?
we don't want it backlit by the sun. So for example, if we put it on the west side or the east side, when mass comes, the light will come through if we have light. And basically everyone, the priest will turn out to be a black dot because all the light coming through the windows, you can't see it. So that's really the sticking points a lot with a lot of the churches that we deal with, is that we want to make sure that everything that's happening can always be seen at any time during the day. So typically we don't orient them to the east or west.
Yeah.
In the Middle Ages, the cathedrals were oriented that way, but that was then.
But then they were probably all solid.
Oh, yeah.
So
It was toward the east in the Middle Ages, they were right.
different time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we are going to take you inside the building now. So as we're walking through the space, we're going to start in gathering and then go towards worship, and then we're going to get into some detail of some of the liturgical art and artwork. This is the gathering space of St. Mary Magdalene. So you can see some of the elements that we talked about are reiterated here. A lot of the clear story windows and the windows that are also facing towards the community here. St. Mary Magdalene is a little different type of gathering space. So in this gathering space, when you're walking in, we are trying to set up a very reverent experience. So you're looking at the main doors right on axes, right? And you've got the lower threshold of the main doors that you're going to walk through. And that's kind of a symbol of quieting down and exiting out. When you exit out of the church, gathering spaces have to do two things, right? When you enter in, you're quiet and reverent. When you exit, it's a time for evangelization It's a time for things like a town hall. And when we say town hall, it's really for to be able to set up some of the church community kiosks and that sort of thing that you might have. And so the gathering spaces are really trying to do two things here. This one isn't as much of a town hall where they use their parish life center for that. So that's why you're seeing this kind of smaller, more axial arrangement here.
What did you say about the windows? The windows are,
So the windows were really important in this space just to let light in and then also to let light out so that when you're driving past this church in the evening, it's lit up. And then you'll see also in here, there's a lot of different textures. And that again goes to that textural component. So we try to put different textures where it's to the human touch, right? So the wood on the doors, the cold metal handles of the main doors and hardware, and then the stonework on the walls. And it's a very different gathering space. This is St. Peter's. So on the right of this image here, you're seeing the old exterior wall. And through this space, they've got a, this space is really set up to host that town hall sort of experience. And then it gets more reverent as you approach the main worship doors. But really this whole experience, there's a cafe when you walk in. And that's typically where, instead of people walking to our family life center, which is in a different building, which is a challenge for them, now they're able to host after church events here.
And so, just to give you the connection to the outside. So one of the things that we try to do, we're going to do, but because of the VE process that disappeared for at this moment. But what it was is that if you go back and look at the overall plan that we created for them for the outside, outside here, you can see a connection. One, it connects us to nature, which is very important. The other thing that it had is there was going to be a Marian garden out there, so that you would be able to connect inside to out, and it was directly on axis with everything else, with the baptismal font, the altar, tabernacle, crucifix. So that's another reason why this is from transparency, you can try to connect inside and outside.
And this church is very deeply rooted in their natural surroundings. So we're working with them right now on things like an outdoor worship area, and that we just finished up their rosary garden. This is as you make that turn around the curve from the image we were just in, this is the entry to the worship area. And so this is much different setup than St. Mary Magdalene. It's a lot more transparent. They wanted this transparent experience when you walk in. St. Mary Magdalene is more of the heavy doors and kind of a peek and surprise inside. When you walk in here, you've got a baptismal font directly in front of you, layered by the sanctuary, altar, tabernacle, and then the stained glass behind it. So you've got a lot of layering elements in here, all down the main aisle.
This is St. Peter's.
This is St.
You
Peter's.
didn't have before and after site picture.
Yeah. So the doors that you're seeing here, everything past the doors is a renovation.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see what it did look like.
Yeah.
If we're looking at doing something here,
Yeah.
what might we be looking at?
Yeah. So in here, one of the things that we really focus on is changing the materiality of things like the floor. Having a special material on the floor, especially down the main aisle. We're trying to highlight these axes, and we're also trying to bring some of the liturgical art to more upfront to the people.
Where's the baptismal font there?
So the baptismal font is right here. This is an immersion font, and then there's also a bowl up at the top for infant
so-
baptism.
So is that all to the altar? You can't walk there.
You walk around it.
Yeah, you walk around.
Yep.
the front.
So it's, it's interesting working with different priests. Each priest wants something different, as long as we provide them a baptismal font. So Father Fabio said, I want to be able to immerse people, and I want them to walk into the baptismal font on Easter Vigil.
And where is the immersible? Right there in the front?
You
Yeah.
just walk in.
So you walk, so if you were to walk straight, this would be your first step up. And then you would start to step down into the water
And you go out the other way. or
and you
back?
go out the other side. We always try to have you go out towards the sanctuary. St. Mary Magdalene, it's set up the same way where when you exit the baptismal font, you're facing the sanctuary.
So on the sides, is that reflection from the window?
You're seeing the reflection from the windows there. Yeah. I love that this image caught that in it because you can really see that nature integration.
One thing you may comment about a priest having his preference on any issue. In our diocese, priests aren't really here for a long period of time. I mean, we've been here, we've got 3 priests. So I mean, shouldn't it be a higher up authority that makes the
The
decision?
wonderful thing about the Grand Rapids Diocese that's different than the Kalamazoo and the Lansing Diocese is that we have something called the Art and Architecture Group. And everybody, if we do anything with inside a chapel or the worship space, we get together and we present the ideas to them. And it's there, they ultimately will present it to the bishop. And if the bishop says that it's okay what we're doing, then we move forward.
Just to follow up on John said, a bit of context, the reason we got to know John and Jamie was that we had had discussions here about moving our tabernacle and had talked to the committee at the diocese about that. And they said, well, you know, we don't want any DIY projects, no do-it-yourself stuff. You need to work with a qualified liturgical architect who understands these things, and that architect will help you make an informed recommendation to the committee. And they recommended John and Jamie. So here we are. That's so yeah, they're working with the committee and us to try to find out what would be acceptable. Can't just put it anywhere we want to.
That's right. Yeah. So they really do keep the consistency of So this is showing, so again, flipping from the more transparent entry to St. Mary Magdalene. So you've got these very solid doors, and we're really trying in these images highlight that main aisle. So when you walk into St. Mary Magdalene, you can see that dark line down the center. And that dark line is highlighting the axis of the roof above you and the very center of the church. And so that's leading you up to the front, to the altar and sanctuary there. And then this one too, the main aisle is really being highlighted by some of the daylighting. And so you're headed towards the light as you're entering in towards the stained glass. And with this one as well, we've got some liturgical elements along the way. So for Easter Vigil, where you're stopping along the aisle, you'll notice that we've got tile breaks in there. So those are stopping points down the main aisle. So trying to bring some of those liturgical elements into that main aisle experience.
So one of the things I just noticed that remember is that with St. Mary Magdalene, Father Godfrey, they have a basilica.
But they have what?
A basilica. And so that was and so when I'm looking at it, when I look at the different masonry types here that you see, that sort of start bringing in the rustication of the brick block to try to start tying it up the height and all that stuff, just to help with his interpretation of a modern basilica.
I thought basilica was a designation, but is it also a type of building?
Yeah, John, I think in the first week we talked about basilica as a architectural style. It comes from the early Roman period, where they were a peaked building on axis. They were essentially the Roman town halls, or city centers, or civic centers, and they were built all over the Roman Empire, basically on the same architectural model. When the church became Christianity became the official religion, the easiest thing to do was either convert existing basilicas, like St. John Lateran, or to build new churches on that pattern, because everybody knew how to build.
Okay, thank you.
But isn't a basilica a designation today?
Yes.
Today.
Yes.
With some criteria, I don't know what the criteria
is.
is.
But-
Not the building itself, but
Right.
Right,
something about history and what went on there.
not a designation of architecture.
So this priest really had nothing to do with making it a basilica.
No, he
That's
doesn't,
gonna happen over time.
right, no, it's not, it was his version of what he
It's
did.
a style. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
So this is looking at St. Mary's Parish in Marshall, Michigan. So this is one of the third plan that we looked at. It's the one where we are standing, this image was taken standing right under the choir loft. That you asked about, and we'll kind of turn around with the camera a little bit later on. But before this church, you know, setting up the main aisle with a focus point was one of our goals here. With having we moved the tabernacle to a central location. We are still working with this church right now. It's a Victorian era church. We're looking for a high altar for the back. And so really starting to enhance some of the furniture and get that tabernacle up higher. This is older crucifix in there. They're hanging a much larger crucifix this week in there. But it's beautiful Victorian era church.
The tabernacle was on the old altar from years ago.
It is behind.
Yes, and there's a new altar in front.
Yep, correct.
Typical.
Yep. Yep, and for this one, we used wood elements to highlight the main aisle and then continue the wood material up onto the sanctuary, so it leads you all the way to the back.
Are you suggesting that they would do the altar ad orientem? In the back, high altar in the back?
that's
They
the
would-
next goal, yes.
They would do the Eucharistic prayer ad orientem.
I don't know
So-
if they'll do that or not. I don't know if it's just more of image that they want to try to get back, or whether they're going to stay with what they have, how they operate today.
I would assume they would probably stay with how they operate today, but
Is the idea today to keep the tabernacle near the altar area
yeah,
or off to one of the
correct.
sides?
So this is the location of it. We're looking for a
Yeah.
larger high altar
Yeah,
to.
But that's
enhance it more.
typical now, centered as opposed to left or right.
We're doing all of the above. So, we do left to right more often. You know, a lot of the churches that we've done are centered. It poses some problems. For example, when a priest is standing at the altar, it covers the tabernacle if it's not high enough. But then it gets too high and it's hard to reach into, right? And so, we've done it all the above.
The completion date of that structure,
1875.
what we're looking at right there.
Yeah, we only applied paint to it and flooring and kind of refreshed all of the wood elements in there.
One thing, a couple of weeks ago, I was in a church of St. Andrews in Saline, Michigan. And they used to have a side altar where they had their tabernacle and they moved it to the back now. But their day of adoration, I mean, when they have Eucharistic adoration, I mean, some people are saying it feels like it's so far away from being able, like, we can get right up close
Correct.
in our
Yeah.
chapel. And so that makes a distancing kind of feeling.
That's one of
So far
the,
back.
that's one of the things that we try to, because we're trying to always get us closer. Our scheme, we try to get you closer to the sanctuary so that you can experience that. And that's one of the challenges with these older churches. Like if you look at this one right
This
here,
sanctuary is
this sanctuary
very
is
large.
really deep. So it's really hard to get close to for that adoration. You know, as Jamie mentioned, we've located the tabernacle in many different places. And really the only requirement is that it's gotta be seen by everybody. Okay, so whatever that means. And so it presents challenges to us. But so one of the things you should do is that when you go to different churches, different areas of churches, you should look and see where the tabernacle is at. Because there's so many different places that you noticed that we went to St. Thomas More in Minneapolis, and it's off to the side. People can both pray there all they want. It's not directly behind, because it would be exactly how you said, it's so far back, it seems like it's out of reach. And that's a tough thing. And so when we look at these churches, the best way, right now, I wish we had to move across the corporate belt, because it's going to change this church dramatically when it's done. But we look at more as how is this composition look, so that people can understand it. Okay, so I look at eye movement and how that means, so that when you walk in, the first thing you're going to see is most likely the cross and crucifix. When you come in the door, your eyes can focus. It will probably focus. Once you go in and sit down, what are you going to see? Because if you're always going up like this or that way, it's hard to keep focus. So the goal is to try to get this stuff all within our eyes, so that we can see and concentrate without having to look all around. So we try to do our best is to get a composition that works. And so, for example, the church here at our Lady of the Lake, there's a composition there where the altar is, where the baptismal font is, where the tabernacle is, choir is, and it's all sort of in your eyesight, so you can see. And you're not trying to have, because you get tired. Your eyes get tired, your necks get tired, and you probably even know what's happening. But the whole idea is to give you a composition that you can understand what's going on.
And so this is just another example of that layering effect as you're walking down the main aisle, highlighting that main aisle experience. In here, you've got the crucifix. You're looking straight behind the crucifix and tabernacle, which you can see in the distance there is a chapel. And so you're looking through that at the chapel. And the main aisle it's perfect, but it's accented to lead you up to the sanctuary. And then this is St. Mary Magdalene. So I like this image a lot because it's showing some of the daylighting and clear story lighting that's coming in to highlight the main aisle. We've got space at one of the things that we look at is the width of the main aisle and what's appropriate for a church that size. Right, so smaller churches may have a thinner aisle. This is a medium-sized church, so I think that's an 8-foot aisle there. But we try to open it up as you're entering in, and then again towards the sanctuary. And you can see here how it starts to open up towards the sanctuary. And then this is an image of St. Robert's. And so St. Robert's, again, that main aisle experience being highlighted by some of the daylighting, right where, we saw that exterior photo where you have the roof come right up to a point, which is right here. Then you have the light flooding into that point there. That really starts to accent that tree-like structure and the sanctuary as well.
I noticed the main crucifix is way off to the left. The one in the center is
It is.
insignificant.
And the altar is not centered.
Yeah.
What's the logic there?
That goes back to my first comment. Yours, there's no straight path to heaven. And that was the non-seniors perspective. And so that's why we see the altar off center, cross and crucifix off to the side. All the different elements are, so actually, this is a little bit different. Actually, he had the presider's chair down on the floor. And so he had a lot of different things that were different from the church was originally built. We'll talk about this next week a little bit more in depth, but right now we are going through a different process of, I won't say correcting. It's not correcting, but in some, it's a different view from a different priest. So we're helping them to work through that stuff with diocese, right?
We're in the process of recentering some of the metrics.
Is there some canon law requirement to architecture?
Is there what requirements?
Is there some canon law requirements for church architecture thing?
What we follow is the step out of the camera. Basically, we follow these two books.
General instruction around this.
And Living Stones. Actually, this is a wonderful complementary book to this one to help make it a little bit more clear.
Mhm.
A lot of times we'll suggest that the building committee that we're working with reads Living Stones before we start having the.
But do those have some,
Mhm.
Yeah.
religious connotation or authority, if you will?
They,
Who prepared those?
Catholic Church,
Vatican.
yes,
That's
so
what-
yes, there is, yes, there is, but there's a lot of freedom. So it's not
Okay.
straightforward, I wish it was that straightforward, maybe people like
Mhm.
these, but it's not that straightforward. So for example, I'll say, the only thing that is really clear is that the altar must be at the center. So,
That was not.
well, you
That's
understand,
correct.
the altar
Yeah.
must be at the center, but that was actually before this book came out, so there was a different time again.
Mhm.
For the, and then at that time also, we didn't have the art and architecture committee, Grand Rapids.
John, I think the history of that Living Stones book is it came out of one of the constitutions of Vatican II. So Vatican II made some adjustments to the general instruction for the Roman Missal, GIRM. And then the USCCB took those Vatican II documents and adapted them. That Living Stone. So it's, I guess, the history of what that book is, goes back to Vatican II.
Correct.
That's-
You have the tabernacle.
No, not in this picture.
The tabernacle here is in the chapel.
I was gonna say it's still in the chapel.
Yeah.
What is your interpretation of the principal visual attraction when you walk down the aisle in this church? What do you see?
Tree. The
Mhm.
tent
You see
stakes,
you see the structure,
You see the what?
the structure.
the structure that's holding up.
I see the organ.
Mhm.
Well,
The pipes.
Yeah, I would say it's a common, so it's with the natural light coming through the stained glass. It's actually sort of an equal. When you look at the organ pipes and the stained glass, which is the road to Emmaus. They both complement each other and they both take up about the same positive and negative composition that you're seeing here. This picture may not reflect it as well.
Mhm.
So it seems like you've got the ambo on the left and the altar on the right. Trying to designate both parts of the mass. But we're not used to seeing it that way.
Mhm.
But that's subject to change, isn't it, in this church? Is that what you were saying?
It could, we're still working through that.
Okay, that's a possibility you're working on.
Yeah, possibility.
I guess to follow up on that question. When you continue your work here at Our Lady of the Lake, are you looking at rectifying other deficiencies in our space? For instance, our ambo, I know why our ambo is on the right, set up where it should be on the left, and that's because the choir voices wouldn't give up on space for the choir. And so as you look at our platform is dramatically short on the left. So the ambo was moved to the right. Now, are we looking at making any of those corrections?
So,
Because our current ambo is almost a replica of the stand for our existing tabernacle.
So there is.
Would that be a sufficient place to rectify where the ambo is? And put
Mhm.
possibly the tabernacle where the existing ambo is?
Oh, that's possible.
Okay,
So, now,
I was
I'm
just
not gonna-
wondering
I'm
whether
What
how
I'll
big a
say-
scope there was, because we have some aesthetic deficiencies
Mhm.
that I would think we would want to look at
There's,
in one sweep
yeah,
rather
so-
than,
Mhm.
because from my design experience, that would be a very simple fix
So there's.
in our current conditions, especially if you just look at the space between the existing organ and, there's a sort of a crater there. And that's really the missing space.
Yeah.
Of where the ambo should be.
And so there's nothing that says that the ambo belongs on the right or left.
Okay.
Mhm.
So it can go on either side. It's a matter of looking at how the movement maybe happens on on the sanctuary. And so, well, we'll talk about, here's a great example, St. Robert's that we're looking at right now. When the cantor has to come and sing from the choir, which is on your right side, I believe. That person has to walk all the way across in front,
Yeah,
bow, go up.
exactly,
right?
that's why it happened.
Right.
And so,
Because we're on
and
the
so,
side.
so we're working through that right now with the
Good.
diocese, and we may still leave it on this side when it's said and done. But we have the opportunity to put the other side so this person isn't walking that great distance. But, there's some positives to that person walking that distance. And I know some people, how fast can we get on mass? There's a wonderful pause when this person gets up. He or she walks across, stops at the altar, bows, and takes another whopping 5 seconds to walk up. But it seems like an eternity, that person, to get up to the platform and get up to or go up to the sanctuary and get to the ambo. And the way I look at it, that one is that it's another opportunity for us to sit there and pause and think of what's happening in the mass. So there's plenty of different opportunities. And so, like I said, the only thing that is really firm is that the altar must be in the center. That's it. Other than that, it's really just trying to place these elements so that people can understand. So just for your information, the same gentleman who designed the liturgical furnishings here designed your liturgical furnishings there. So that's why there's probably a lot of similarities. When you go there, you're going to see some similarities from your liturgical furnishings to the sort of liturgical furnishings at St. Robert's.
Even the way it's, the ambo is rooted into the sanctuary. is similar.
So that's why there's probably a lot of similarities when you look at St. Robert's and yours.
So tied to the main aisle, or kind of what we wanted to tie into the main aisle, is talking about baptismal fonts. We have a lot of examples to show you today of different fonts. Much like we were talking about before, we place these throughout the church, in the front to the left, in the front to the right. We place them in the back as you enter in, and even out in gathering. So you're going to see some of these examples today. Really what we're trying to do with a font, though, is we're using, you can see that this is a bronze bowl. It's a hand-casted bronze bowl. It's got the texture on the outside. It has a phrase going around the bowl, and then it's also got mosaic work, and that starts to tie into some of the artwork that goes throughout this church in particular, this St. Joseph the Worker in Grand Rapids. This is, you'll see a lot of layering of elements here. This is St. Mary Magdalene. So this is an immersion font, right? Very similar to St. Peter's when you were walking into those doors. So you would enter into this font here, walk through the water, and out towards the sanctuary, which is over on this side of the screen. Here you've got a infant baptismal bowl or font up at the top. And this, something that we always talk about with churches when we're designing baptismal fonts is the sound of water and what that means to the church. So that's sometimes we'll locate a font in the gathering space, and you get that beautiful sound of water as you're coming in. Sometimes we'll have that. This church has a sound of water in the worship space. St. Peter's also has the sound of water going through that baptismal font as well. This one, the layering of liturgical art is here. You've got the chapel doors right here, so you can actually get those open up completely, so you can actually get quite a large crowd of people around that font for baptisms. And then you've got an ambry here and your tabernacle and paschal candle. So all these elements are kind of layering together.
Where is the altar at here?
It is right here, right to the side. Behind this wall is a ramp that goes up to the altar.
And so where's the sanctuary?
The sanctuary is right here. Sorry, the altar is towards the center of the sanctuary there. So you're looking at the side of the church.
Yeah, we'll have an overall picture coming up here.
Just a suggestion, it's a little hard to see that mouse arrow, and John, you're tall enough that you might be able to.
I definitely am not. That'd be a good point.
Okay. We'll do it next time.
And so this is an example of a baptismal font that's out in the gathering space.
This is Saint Sebastian.
This
Yeah.
is Saint Sebastian.
Mhm.
And you can see this has the running water. When we're working with the artists for baptismal fonts, we talk about what kind of running water it is. So the sound of running water going down a wall is much different than this running water that's hitting the water pretty heavily, right? Where you're going to hear it quite a bit more, which is appropriate in a gathering space. And this is St. Robert's. And so you can see on here, everything around the font is reflecting artwork of baptism all the way to the stained glass behind here. You've got the ambry set up in right behind, and then you've got multiple channels of running water going through here. And this is this font is always running. This is in the gathering space.
Maybe Greg or Carla would know more than you the answer, but is our baptismal water, it doesn't run during mass normally?
Not during normal masses. If it's Easter Vigil, we'll have it running.
And yet some places do have their water running.
I don't think even a regular baptism, we don't typically have it running because typically it's the babies and the younger kids in the bowl versus using the full font. But for Easter Vigil, yes, that's when we would have it running because people are getting
Some
it.
churches are choosing, because you like to hear the sound of running water.
Right,
Yes,
the
you
living-
could choose to do
Living water, it's very symbolic.
So most of the churches that once we build these, they let them run all except 6 weeks.
Mhm.
that. They let them run.
Yes,
they let 'em
yeah.
run.
Right.
Mhm.
And this is a view of the baptismal font at St. Peter's. So this is your entry point right here. You can get a little bit of a closer view here. This was taken before they actually kind of started to move into the space, but the ambry oils being in this nook here and exiting out through this side. You've got the infant pool here. And this was so one of the things that we were trying to represent in this baptismal font and in the church in general was the importance of it being a lakeshore community. And so you're going to see the river rock that's surrounding, or like kind of beach stone that's surrounding it. This church is right on Kalamazoo Lake in Douglas. And then all the way down to the concrete being a custom mix to get more of a white color to represent more of that sand color. And then the blue of the tile that goes throughout this church as a representation of water. And so we're going to get into some sanctuary images here. You're going to see a lot of different layouts. And some of these we've done custom furniture. So the one you're looking at here, we did do custom furniture for the altar and anvil. Some of it we are altering some of the existing furniture. And again, you're going to see different locations of the tabernacle as well. So this is in St. Peter's. One of the things that we try to do as we're designing liturgical furniture is we want it to stand out from the other materials in the church. And so in St. Peter's, you've got the darker wood on the pews, you've got the darker wood on the chairs and some of the tables surrounding it, but then you've got this lighter wood for the altar and anvil. So you'll see that typically as we go to some of these other ones.
Was the tabernacle there in an alcove? You can't.
This is in an alcove right in the back here. Yep.
Mhm.
And then we have glass behind the alcove because the wall that we've got there, we wanted to still see this beautiful stained glass come down. And what it does is it colors that glass behind the tabernacle, creates a really beautiful effect there.
So this gives you another perspective of the church St. Joseph the Worker. And some key things here is that this is as far as I know, it's the only Hispanic church in the Grand Rapids Diocese. One of the things that was important, we talked about the baptismal font and its location. The reason this one's located up front is because of how many baptisms they have a year. They because of the infants, they're running, I think, more than 400 to 500 a year that they run through here to baptismal. And so they want it up front because it is a whole community participating. And so it's very important that, and it is full immersion. As you can see, you have the different oils right there again. But the unique thing, two things about this church that are very unique. One is that it was a wonderful opportunity to learn about 13 different dialects. So there's 13 different Spanish or Hispanic dialects at this church. And so what we did is that we created a back wall where they could stick their image of Mary from whatever dialect they come from, and to have that be able to talk. The candle wall, as you can see here, which we'll talk about because we won't come back to this picture, but the candle wall you can see is on top there. So they can still light candles to their, and the unique thing about this art-wise is that when you look at the cross, the altar and the ambo, they are all, it's a mosaic that was created by a wonderful artist in Grand Rapids, Jose Nerez, who unfortunately, this was his last project. He volunteered his time to create this work. He unfortunately passed away from brain cancer. We carried him into the church on the day it was dedicated, and about a week later he died. And so it's beautiful. He wanted to do this because of his background. You'll, if you get an opportunity, you will see a lot of his artwork around Grand Rapids that he did. But it's beautiful mosaics that he put together.
Where's the tabernacle here?
The tabernacle is off to the side, and through that room, that open door right here is the tabernacle.
It's
So
in that chapel area.
it's in the chapel. Because there just wasn't enough room. If you look at how much we had to compact in, and that, like I said, it was a unique church. They had about basically they've been saving money for 8 years. They roughly raised about $100,000 a year for through their Hispanic festival, and they finally got the money that they needed, and they went out and bought a Christian Reformed church, and we converted.
This comes, okay, you're back there now.
Yeah.
And then this is sanctuary layout at St. Mary Magdalene. So you can see some of the different elements in here that we're trying to tie in. So we're trying to create a foundation for the ambo and the altar. So you can see that really thick travertine stone that we used on the top there. And then the tile work that starts to dissipate towards the edges of the sanctuary, that starts to cluster in towards the center of the altar. And once you get to that center of the altar where the tile has started to cluster, we try to, when there is a relic that we can use, try to make that accessible so that it can be seen. So in this one, we have mounted it in the tile, recessed it in the floor, so that it can be seen through this glass. And one other thing I wanted to mention on here, that down to the materiality of the back wall is something really important that we start to bring in genuine materials. And it talks quite a bit about this in Living Stones too. But so when you look at the finish of this back wall, it looks like it could be a painted finish. What it is a polished plaster. So one of the important things about polished plaster is when you touch it, it's cold. And when you knock on it, it's really hard, right? It sounds a lot different than maybe your chipboard walls. And so that that sense of solidarity in materials is something that we bring in, especially at this sanctuary area.
And would those fabrics be changed out with liturgical seasons then?
Yeah, those are banners that get changed out.
And the tabernacle is
That
way
is-
over on the right. What's that? Is that a railing to get up to the?
That is a railing. And when you were looking at the baptismal font, there's a wall that's in front of that.
Oh, that's where the baptismal font.
Right. So the baptismal
Correct.
font is off to the side
Right over
over
there.
here, and the railing's hidden behind the wall of the that baptismal font.
John and Jamie, to the point of the railing there, correct me if I'm wrong, but in our interactions with the committee, one of the things that we were told is that the faithful must have access to the tabernacle for prayer. So therefore, you have to consider handicap access. If you have to locate the tabernacle somewhere where people can reasonably get to it. And so when we were talking about where can we put it, that becomes a consideration. Where is there handicap access,
Right.
ramps, railing.
Can you go back
Absolutely.
one?
Yeah.
In that same vein, where the tabernacle's way in the back room back there,
Mhm.
that room probably has a door to get somewhere else.
Yep.
But that tabernacle could be in the corner of that room. Accessible from both sides, so accessible seen in mass, accessible in the mass, and
Sure.
also accessible in the room.
Right.
And so you don't have to open up, like here, the entire church space to provide that access,
Right.
which is a difficult issue.
So in the case of our church, we have on the wall over there, which would be the wall where the,
Towards the choir.
towards the choir room, there is a handicap accessible
Yes.
ramp that runs that way, that gets you to the ambo.
And
So anything on that side of the sanctuary
It's already.
is accessible.
and
On the other
actually,
side of the sanctuary, it is.
actually, some of that brick wall on that side is non-load bearing wall. And could be modified very easily, especially where the cutouts are in there, and there's sort of like a dead space plenum on the inside. I mean, there's plenty of options over there because they are not load bearing walls.
Interesting.
In this iteration, where is the crucifix above?
It's right up above, yeah. Yeah. So the crucifix at this church is centered. And Saint Sebastian, so this just another example that varies from the others. So in this church, you've again got the layering of elements. The liturgical furniture at this church starts to tie into the structure up above. Crucifix being front and center, and the tabernacle, you can see it right through the doorway with those small fold doors, and then behind that is a chapel.
So there's doors there between the chapel,
Or the opening.
and they're open now, but there are doors there that can be closed for the chapel then.
I gotta think about that one. I don't think it can be closed. I don't think you can be there during service.
Mhm.
No, but are there doors there now and that are open?
No.
Or there's no
Yeah,
doors,
just
there.
a
No doors, just an opening.
Yeah, just-
Even for chapel service.
And then this is looking again at St. Mary and Marshall. So you can see a ramp in the distance there. We did add a ramp in here to make this space more accessible. Through that white door that's up on the sanctuary, that's how you enter into their reconciliation room. And so making this accessible was really important. And then they've also got enough space by the tabernacle to have kneelers, because there's quite a lot of room behind there.
You mentioned a lot of the liturgical art was stripped out of this in a 1980 renovation. So is what we're seeing there, the stained glass, some of these pieces, is this new or is this proposed?
So the stained glass is original. And then the Stations of the Cross here, we repainted them. And but we repainted them to kind of match the new color scheme going throughout the church. We did add things like gold leafing into this church and across some of the edges here. The church before we came in here was a very dark burgundy red forest green. And so our goal was just to lighten up this entire space. So bringing in that Marian blue color, and we lightened that up a little bit, and then a lot of different shades of white to start to draw depth out of the arches and architecture.
Yeah, so one of the, Jamie brought up where the confessional is, well, that was torn out. So this is why you typically won't go on the sanctuary to get to the confession. And so one of his plans is the next phase is that we will rebuild a confessional back where it's supposed to be within the church at that point. So.
Yeah, that seems almost intimidating to walk through the sanctuary. Confession there.
So this is a little bit on music literature, and so we're going to talk a little about the choir areas. And so there's a variety of different locations that you'll see choir areas in here. I think the main thing what we want to focus on here is that first off, the choir is part of the community. It's not separate. It is there to support the community. The requirement is that whether it's up on a balcony or off to the side, is that it, like everybody else, it must face the altar. And so that everyone's always focused on the altar. So that's why when you see, this is Immaculate Heart of Mary Parish in Grand Rapids. This is wonderfully acoustically tuned music area that, to give you an
See that.
example, I was standing at the back of church. My wife was standing up front, and I'm sitting at the back of the church ushering, and I can hear Jesus talking like this, and I can hear every word that her and her friend are talking about up there, which they probably shouldn't have been talking about. So I explained it to them that how, because she wasn't used to it, because the old acoustical thing, it didn't, there was no projection of the group coming out. So, what I'll say is that, with the acoustics of the Catholic Church, we got to be conscious, and there's always a balance on the reverberation times, and it's a challenge. So a lot of you who probably experienced older churches and the reverberation time and the spoken word is really hard to hear, but it's wonderfully musical. You love to sit there and listen to the music, and it's beautiful on how the sound reverberates around the room. Well, that's always a challenge, to get that balance, to get that wonderful sound that we want for music and balance out so that you can hear with the spoken word, because they're both important, what's happening up there. And each of them add a different flavor. Some people, we talk about the mystery of what we do. So whether it's through incense, whether it's through music, each of them, or whether it's through the spoken word or what's happening on the altar. And that mystery is what we're trying to create on everything we do. And so it's important that the music and spoken word aligns with what's happening. Wonderful thing about today is that the sound systems that they've created, it helps us balance these things out a lot easier, and it's a lot easier to understand than what we have. And so, for example, the St. Mary's in Marshall, their sound system was from the 80s. And when we put in the new one, they were just so happy that you could hear everything that Father Craig was finally saying. But the music in there is beautiful all the time. So
This is an image of the choir loft at St. Mary's. So you can see her up by the arches, by the lighting there. So just another layout, a difference of layout. What we try to do, these looks like cabinets behind there. So that's housing some of the organ speakers. And when we're approaching music, we're trying to do things like really clean up the space as well. So when we're in this one, rebuilding the stands, hiding all the electrical. So a lot of that cleanup work makes a big difference for the choir being able to mill around the space. And then we're also just trying to put them in a spot where, as John was talking about, one of the important things is whether they're on the left or right side, the important thing is that the choir director can communicate with the priest, and they can visually see each other in their visual cues.
Now is this, I thought this was over the entrance doors.
This is over the entrance doors.
Oh,
That's correct. This is the very back wall here.
so the choir director is facing the choir as opposed
In this instance, yes. Yeah.
yeah, so typically they have a mirror on the organ so that they can look back and see what's happening on the sanctuary to understand what's going on. Another example of which we'll get to experience again next week is St. Robert's. It shows you the organ, shows the relationships to the choir and the piano. And so this one has been, I'll say, through the 3 or 4 choir directors that are there, it's been manipulated around. I think this is finally the final location of everything that's there so that it works, because this one is truly a really challenge, because one of the difficult pieces about this church is that it's a 180-degree fan. And the choir happens to be at one of this point, so to be able to see what's happening on the altar and be able to direct the choir Because most likely you're not gonna have a conductor. The music director is going to be probably playing an instrument. It's a huge challenge on this to see everything what's going on.
There's similarities to Our Lady of the Lake here.
So gives you another example again.
Any questions? Before we keep going through?
I have a question
Yeah.
that was way back to one of the first slides in this
Sure.
section, but with the entrance, I think to St. Mary Magdalene. I noticed that even the carpet was pointing towards
Yes.
the front. It was all like
Yeah, there's a
arrows.
herringbone
Mhm.
pattern carpet
That's
that,
pretty.
right on axis to pointing towards the front.
Yep.
Good eye. And we're gonna talk about reconciliation, Candelaria, and artwork as we complete. So reconciliation, there's, as we're approaching this, there's a few different methods, whether it's seen or not seen. If it's in the worship space or near a chapel. So those discussions, this is the reconciliation room for St. Mary Magdalene. So you can see it's part of the liturgical art wall that shares with the Stations of the Cross and then into the candle area. And then the reconciliation area at St. Peter's is towards the back of the church, still in the worship area, but in a more private space than St. Mary Magdalene. And then so from the reconciliation, if we pivot over, you're looking at the candle area, much like St. Joseph the Worker, St. Mary Magdalene has a hugely diverse culture at their church. And so we just thought as we were designing this, incorporating, as John had said before, all of the more familiar Marys in here was really important. They're set in front of this yellow glass. So when you're on the other side of this curved wall, you can start to see the flicker of the candles, and we're really setting up again one of the mysteries as they're coming around the worship area.
I've never heard of candle areas before.
Yeah, so it's something that we're building into spaces more. You'll see traditionally, you'll see a candle area as in a little votive, steel votive candle holder.
Oh, I see.
Yep.
Yes, okay,
Yep.
this is the new,
Yeah,
okay.
this was done in a much different way. And it was really to start to incorporate all of the different statues that were coming in here. Families, I remember one family from India, they flew with their statue over, and we were quick changing the size to fit that statue that they had just bought. So they were personally dedicated in here. Then the Stations of the Cross. So these are Stations of the Cross that we're trying to highlight before. One of the things they talked about is they wanted them to pop in the space a little bit more. And so with these ones, we've got a candle on each one, but we've also got them on the wood walls, and then on this wall in front of the glass that starts to backlight them. With Stations of the Cross, we usually cast a light on it as well, and just by mounting it on a panel. So in this one, we've got the bronze and dark wood, really starts to help them stand out as you're sitting in the church. Making sure there's enough room around them for circulation and for groups to journey around is also important. And then this just starts to take us, we've got a few examples of artwork here just in various forms. So this was again from St. Mary Magdalene. Before the church burned down, they had stained glass that represented sinner to saint. And that's kind of what they're known for. I think it was 7 or 8 saints, I think it's 7. And so we wanted to represent that there in artwork. This artwork is in the gathering space and it lights up. So an illustrator came in and created these panels. We've got them. We talked a lot about liturgical art being accessible to people. In this case, those families go out in the gathering space a lot at this church. And so making them close to the ground so that children could interact with them was really important. We tie in light and color, and telling the story near the bottom is something that we did here.
Yeah, so this quickly, this is again, Grand Rapids, and you can see the different texture that we placed on the wall to help draw your eye to it, but then yet this is another example of mosaics and how they were created and what they represent. So originally, when this was done, this was where the tabernacle was, but through a lot of different conversations, the tabernacle now is behind the altar. And now, so we didn't want to lose, and the baptismal font was actually a portable baptismal font. And so we basically came in and said, made a suggestion that we take the tabernacle stand, we modify it, and we put the importance back on this mosaic through baptism. And so it's a wonderful example of a mosaic on what it could be. The other thing, the interesting thing, I'll go that way, is that the first couple times the bishop came and visited us, he walked in and bowed to the baptismal font, because that's what the tabernacle is. And then all of a sudden he was, something's changed. So it was kind of humorous at that point, but anyway.
Yes, the mosaics can be, just a beautiful representation. There's churches that have mosaics on their entire back sanctuary wall. By the baptismal font is great just to represent that artwork. It's similar to stained glass, but a really good use of an interior wall where you don't have glass.
So was that an alcove off the left or right of the
Yeah, it was an
pews or the
alcove.
church?
So originally this was the chapel. So when this church was designed, the main nave, which seats about 800, was there. And then this is, we're just off on the other side of the columns is the chapel, and this is the chapel.
Oh, side chapel,
Yep. It was a side
like
chapel.
the old
Yeah.
cathedral that had 10 or 20 of them.
And another example of artwork, this is right above the tabernacle in the baldacchino at St. Mary Magdalene. So you saw this metal structure surrounding it. On the underside, we were working with a liturgical consultant on this project, and what the constellation is representing is the day of dedication of the church. And so beautiful thing is you're looking up kind of a surprise. It's always lit up, and then artwork starts to affect everything. These are the main doors to St. Mary Magdalene in the closed position. So they're carved out with St. Mary Magdalene on there, and then story on it. And so just a really beautiful way to pause as you're entering in. And then this is the altar and ambo and crucifix that John was talking about at St. Joseph the Worker, where the mosaic was tied into that verse in Grand Rapids. And just another example, we use glass a lot as artwork. So stained glass is a form of artwork, whether it's in a very large stand or something that's broken up into smaller pieces, or even something on the side that starts to wash color onto a wall. At IHM, we have stained glass on the side, and so we painted a back wall as a reflective surface to absorb that color. And we've got one more. I know we're running a little bit over here. So we'll just keep going. This is the last portion here, but this should go pretty quick. So this is the rosary as we go from worship into exterior. Just as a precursor, we're really trying to reflect the worship environment in the outdoors. And so that all of the senses that we talked about before ties into these spaces as well. We try to do things like the smell of evergreen, the smell of lavender. You'll get the smell of some of the flowers in these spaces. So this is an example of the Rosary Walk that was just installed at St. Peter. So if you're there earlier in the summer, it may have not been there, but it is there now. This is part of their stage 1 of expansion. This is another example of a Rosary Walk area, and just how you can have some of these influences on the exterior. We're putting stations of the cross outside quite often, and you guys have some out there on the trail, which is really beautiful. Be able to kind of walk through there. So some different interpretations of that, and how the outdoor environment can reflect. Yeah, that's right. how the outdoor environment can reflect that interior worship experience. Things like prayer gardens, we're trying to create different experiences outside. So areas for reflection, areas for reverence, outdoors. There's another example, statuary is another thing that we pull in a lot. And then this is a great active image of outdoor worship. So especially in the last few years, since worship was moved outside for a little bit to have larger groups, we've been asked more to create some of these outdoor worship experiences because people are really enjoying having mass on the grass, mass outdoors, and in the summer months. And so we're working with St. Peter. An extension of their Rosary Walk would be an outdoor mass area. So you can see some of the both informal setup and formal setups that you can have for it. We're looking at more of a formal setup for St. Peter's with the axial arrangement and the crucifix on there and pews. And
Thank you. Any questions or? Yes.
Oh, has the thinking changed on outside?
I don't believe it's changed. I think people are just moving out if they can, just to give them the space until we get comfortable and come back. And that's not just Catholics, it's Protestants too. A lot of them have, both churches have really invested in outdoor space to let people, give them that air, to feel more comfortable to come back.
And it is, it's different, right, in the liturgical setup. So we don't call the outdoor table out there, we don't call it an altar, right? There's only one altar in the church, and that's indoors. But we're still setting up that experience. And it matters, again, that's one of those things that matters on the church community. St. Peter's and Douglas, they were doing outdoor mass way before COVID. And they're a church that celebrates outside quite a bit. And part of it is that they've got multiple buildings across our campus too. So it unifies everyone. But, and so that's another kind of church cultural aspect as well. But.
Well, John, Jamie, thank you so much. Can you share a little bit what we're going to see next week?
And the
we're gonna go
order,
to two churches.
change everywhere.
Yes.
Okay, so next week we're gonna go visit St. Mary Magdalene. That's in Kentwood. That we're gonna be there at 6 o'clock. That church, you're gonna see more of a traditional contemporary church.
Yeah. They just changed it.
Yeah, that one will be more of a traditional layout and what you understand there.
That's a new church.
They're both new churches. I'll go there. They're both newer churches. So.
I mean, new structures. They're not a
Yeah.
Remodel.
Correct.
And then St. Robert's of Newminster, that one will be more of a non-traditional Catholic church. And so we will walk you through, we'll talk, maybe we would share a little bit hopefully I can share a little bit what we're going to be hopefully doing there shortly. And we're just waiting for the Art and Architecture Committee to get back to us, and then we can talk about it. So they're both wonderful experiences. They're both beautiful churches. They're just a little bit different in how they were interpreted at the time when they were built.
So for next week, the paper is not correct. It's in the opposite order. We just got the word that we were switching them around. So St. Mary Magdalene first at 6 o'clock. Anyone that would want to caravan, so to speak, there would need to be here by 4:45. And we would be leaving very shortly after that. So you would want to make sure you're here on time because.
But if you want to just meet us.
But
here,
yes, you could drive directly to Mary Magdalene at 6 and be there at 6. We will begin at 6 when we arrive there. And then we will go to Ada to St. Robert's following that. So whenever we finish at the 1, we'll all caravan over to St. Robert's. and then home. Certainly, if anyone would choose to carpool, then you would be coming back to Our Lady of the Lake to get all your vehicles. But otherwise, it'll probably just look like anyone who just wasn't very confident to go there and be there on your own at 6 could meet here, and we could do a bit of a caravan that way.
And we'll email out.
All the details will be emailed.
Okay, so
Correct.
you're gonna revise it then.
This will be revised again.
So.
Yeah.
And also, we
Yeah.
will make sure you know what entry to come in, because
Yeah.
there's 3 of them to come in.
Yes,
Both churches, they're labeled.
Yeah.
so-
good. Yeah, we will make sure that Corey sends out all the details this week, multiple times, so you'll make sure to have the correct details.
Have there been many churches in the archdiocese who, that after Vatican II churches built that are going through remodeling? And are there any examples out there?
So St. Peter's, right?
St. Peter's would be one,
Mhm.
and Douglas,
Okay,
that was.
A
that-
significant
yeah, they're
one.
not saying, they're not in Grand Rapids, but that's okay.
Well, I know,
I
they
know.
were.
And they were.
We're at the 6th.
Yeah.
That's because
You remember this.
the bishop actually approved St. Peter's. to be
Yeah.
built in Grand Rapids. Circle of the Grand Rapids.
There's a
So just by quickly into that, right now, we probably have 4 parishes that we're looking at rearranging alcohol, rearranging a lot of furniture.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll
thank
look
you.
forward to seeing you on location next week. There will not be a Zoom component for everyone zooming in. Next week, we will be only on field trip.
You're not gonna follow us with the
Yeah.
camera?
Probably not.